is the topic. Oops, continue. So today's community chat involves the topic of honoring Black journalists. And we have three amazing panelists today to talk about their experiences today. So we appreciate that. I will have them introduce themselves in a bit, but just a reminder for community chat, guys, that we have some prepared questions that our diversity, equity, and inclusion team came up with. And if we have extra time in the end, you can ask your question if you have a question. Until then, we ask for everyone to have their Zoom muted until then. And yeah, so cool. Enough of me talking. I will have these wonderful panelists introduce themselves first, and I'll start with Nikki. If you want to start that.
Hi guys. First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Nicole Shaw. Pronouns are she, her, hers. So yeah, I'm actually a senior at the University of Iowa. I'm graduating in May, but I have a lot of experience under my belt already as a budding journalist. I like to keep myself busy. Currently, I am the editor for a media company in Chicago called Off Kilter Media. It's a content creation agency, and we publish a 35-page newsprint monthly, and then we also publish a magazine that goes out twice a year. And a lot of the content focuses on contemporary art, race, and culture. We're really intentional words, please, about centering the voices of minority and marginalized people. A lot of the people that we feature in our publication are people of color, people in the queer community, and as a person who identifies in both of those communities, it's really important to me to uplift those voices because oftentimes they're exploited and taken advantage of and not actually given a space to tell their own stories. And so we really pride ourselves on that. I also hold a lot of other positions, but I think that's the biggest one and the one that I'm most proud of thus far. I am currently working with the New York Times Student Journalism Institute, and we're currently working on a project that's sort of under wraps right now, so I can't really tell you what's happening, but that story will come out in late April.
We are excited. Thanks, Nikki. Whoever wants to go next.
Okay, I'll go next. Hi, I'm Maud Lenny Hetchericka, and I am a columnist with the Chicago Sun-Times in Chicago. And I have been with the Sun-Times, I guess about 27 years. And I write a column called Chicago Chronicles that is about people, places, issues, organizations impacting Black and Brown communities in Chicago. So my mission is to find those diverse narratives and to share the untold stories. University of Iowa, 85 grad, Medill, Northwestern, grad school, master's. Sun-Times was my very first job. I was pretty blessed to get a job at my hometown newspaper, and it's the paper I grew up reading. So for me, it's really been a thrill. And yeah, that's who I am. Oh, and I'm president of the National Association of Black Journalists, Chicago chapter, as well as president of the Chicago Journalists Association in Chicago. And I am just so excited to be here with you guys today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here, Madeline. We appreciate you. And then Josh.
Hey, how are you? My name is Josh, he, him, his. I am a 2018 University of Iowa graduate. Thank you again for having me here. I'm currently a news associate with the Associated Press. It's a very interesting position. The best way I can describe it is I usually do local news coverage, but I also have the opportunity to collaborate with different AP departments like the investigative team, the photo department, and really broaden my skills as a multi-format journalist. And when I worked for the DI, I was photo editor and photographer.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you all, you three, for coming, and I know taking an hour of your day just to talk to us, and we appreciate it. First question that we have planned is, what is a story or work you are most proud of, and how did you come across that story or work? Anyone can start.
Well, I'll start. There's a story that I am submitting for the 2021 awards season that I really loved from last year. And it was there's the African American Archbishop of Washington, D.C. in the Global Catholic Church, who has broken a lot of barriers. And in October, Pope John Paul II, no, what's this? Did you hear me? Pope John Paul. Anyway, Pope Francis named him the very first African American cardinal in the Global Catholic Church. So in the how many centuries of the church, there's never been a Black American serving on the highest governing body of the church. And so it made international headlines. And then in November, when he was installed at the Vatican, I had been beating the bushes. I'd done one story saying that this could only happen in a post-George Floyd world, because the reckoning with race that swept America also swept the globe. And then after I wrote that story, I've been beating the bushes for a different angle on the day he was actually installed. And a source called me and said, "Hey, I know his sister. Would you like to talk to her?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So after the installation, I wrote a story the next day when all the international stories had been focused on canned quotes from him and from the Vatican and from his archdiocese. I was able to sit down with the sister and replete with thumbing through old family albums and talk about who this guy was from birth through today. And for me, it was just an amazing journey, because this guy grew up poor, raised by a single mother in a community that today is considered one of the most dangerous and poverty-stricken in Chicago, where a lot of the youth growing up there are desperately in need of role models. And so for me, this was a prime example of what can happen. You know, the possibilities that I wanted to share with those youth. And we wrote the story, and it was a world exclusive because no one had gotten his family. So yeah, you know, just pure luck, and also just, you know, having great sources. And you know, when you treat your sources well, they give you good tips.
I can go next. My project would probably be a project I did with the Daily Iowan. Actually, it was my first photo essay. I chose this project because it was a project that pushed me furthest out of my comfort zone. At this stage in my career, I hated portraiture. It made me extremely uncomfortable to sit with a subject and really not only capture their emotions, but sit in those emotions with them. But as anyone who works with Danny know, that we pushed right past that. And it really made me a better photographer. It taught me things about myself that I didn't understand, but also pushed me to learn a talent. Portrait photography is going on to be one of my favorite forms of photography since then. And it completely changed how I look at photojournalism.
I'll go next since I'm the last one. Also, again, I apologize if you hear stuff in the background. The tree next to my apartment is very loud. But actually, the thing that I'm most proud of is a collective series that I spearheaded and created. It was initially called Women Like Us, and it was a vertical that I worked on with my company Off Kilter. And It really, I wanted it to center the experiences of women identifying creatives. I wanted to really focus on uplifting the voices, especially of Black women, and curating a space where they could feel comfortable and seen. Because, I mean, my network of people is, I know a lot of Black women and a lot of women of color, and my experience and my conversations with them have shown that a lot of the times they're the blueprint for stuff that goes popular in the media, and then they never get their credit. And it's really hurtful to them. And so I wanted to give them the space to tell their own stories. And that's sort of how I came about that project. It's now being revamped and will be both printed as an insert in our 35-page monthly newsprint, as well as published as a multimedia package online. But if we're talking about a specific story that I'm most proud of, I'd have to say it's a collaborative project that I worked on for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. CSIS is the #1 think tank in the United States. It's often called upon by Congress for national security concerns. I came across this story because CSIS actually reached out to the University of Iowa and staff there and asked for students who would be interested in participating in a in-depth week-long intensive project. And one of the people in faculty recommended me and asked me to apply, and got the position. So the story was, oh my gosh, words. I'm so sorry, I'm speaking too fast today. The story produced was a multimedia package on women and water in the developing world. So it looked at linking water insecurity and gender disparities. I did most of the data mining, analysis, and visualization for the story, and it provided crucial insight to what angle and focus the story would take on. But the reason that I sort of wanted to focus on water security, and the team as well agreed to take that story on, is because this is an international issue that focuses on, that affects people of color disproportionately. Clean water is a basic need that an astounding portion of people do not have access to across the globe. And so we felt it was our duty to really highlight that issue. And we focused primarily on sub-Saharan Africa and a little bit on India, and how it disproportionately affected women of color, because they often are the people who gather that water. And it really lended itself to a really beautiful multimedia package that went out to their community and sort of also influenced some of the legislature that's going through right now.
Yeah, thank you so much, all you three, for sharing that. Another question that came up is, why did you guys get involved in journalism? What obstacles have you faced in journalism also? Anyone can start this.
Well, so, I always, whenever I talk about that, whenever I answer that question, it sounds so cliche. I entered journalism because I wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. But it's absolutely true, and very much linked to my backstory. And that backstory is that my family arrived in the United States in June 1969 as refugees of the Nigerian Biafran War in Nigeria. And it was a civil war that was the 5th worst genocide in the 21st century. And 2 million of my tribe died by mostly starvation. And it was the first time that starvation was used as a tool of mass destruction. And so, arriving with the clothes on our backs, we faced all the challenges of the American dream. And that is, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move from poverty into the middle class. And so everything that has been a part of my journey helped me understand the potential for transformation for marginalized communities and populations, disadvantaged populations and marginalized communities. And so it was just in my DNA that, others helped me, and a lot of people extended a hand as I went along my journey. So I wouldn't be here without a lot of help from a lot of people and support. not just mentors, but those who helped my family as we got established. And certainly wouldn't be here without education. And so it's so important to me to use my pen and my voice to help those who are in the position I was when I started, which are the poor, the disadvantaged, those who are victims of war, of crime, of violence, of gender and race inequity. All those things are just important to me because they are things I had to overcome in the American dream.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Madeline. That's like, that journey is just amazing. And the work that I've done a little research on the work you've done, and it's just really impressive. So, I mean, personally, I look up to you as well. It feels a bit weird to be in this community chat as another panelist because I'm like, wow, that work is amazing. But I find it's really like awesome that you said that you got into journalism because you wanted to give voice to the voiceless. That's actually why I also got into journalism. If you look at my like online portfolio, that's what it says on my website. So I think it's such an interesting connection. I love that we both are here and approach.
DJ Pichula, DJ Huevito, y seguimos con la joda. Julia, tírame la pista.
Xander, can you like delete that?
I hate it.
Kick him out. There we go. I think someone's trying to zoom on us.
That is unfortunate. I hate it when that happens.
Sorry, guys.
That's
All
okay.
right.
But yeah, so I got involved in journalism sort of as like the obvious option for me, because throughout my life growing up, I mean, I grew up very, very poor, and a lot of the times for me growing up, reading and writing was my escape from the reality of my world. It also allowed me to connect to people. I grew up in a very upper middle class white community because the care was really great. And so reading books allowed me, and articles and things like that allowed me to connect with people who looked like me and that I didn't see in my everyday life. I've always been an avid reader and writer. My mom used to ground me for reading during family time because I would get lost in my own world and wouldn't be paying attention. My favorite stories as a child weren't even fiction. They were either based on a true story or dramatized or even nonfiction. So I think that's just a testament to the I've always had to learn about the world and what's happened and how I could carve out a space for not only myself, but other people, and people who looked like me, where I could tell their stories and my stories, since I thought writers were always really cool people who didn't get paid enough. That's still true.
That's true.
Yeah. So when I came to the University of Iowa, it was just a logical choice to major in journalism and English publishing track because those are the two reading and writing heavy programs. And I fell in love with journalism because it gave me a space where I felt comfortable enough to establish my own voice and demand accountability from people I would have felt too timid and shy to have approached before. I'm a fiercely protective person, so having a loyalty to the public and the public's interests definitely serves me well now, and I'm happy to be doing the work that I'm doing.
Thank you both for sharing. Those are amazing testimonials. My story is a little bit more happenstance. I kind of don't like following you two with this. I got into journalism through photography. I got into photography very much in my senior year of high school, and it became something that I just kind of became enthralled with. I couldn't put the camera down. So when I came to orientation at Iowa, I was asking everyone at the org fair, where can I go do photography at? And I went to the Daily Iowan table, and whoever was there at the time told me, yeah, we're always hiring photographers, go talk. And I walked into the editor-in-chief at the time. It was Emily Bussey. I said, I'm going to work for you with no idea what it entailed, what journalism would be. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And fortunately, I did end up getting hired despite that terrible application I submitted. But journalism quickly took over my life. When I first came to university, I was actually an engineering student. I had no intention of pursuing journalism. It was just something that an avenue to pursue photography. But the more I did it, I started working desk my freshman year. It became to really take over my life in the same way that photography did. I really always had a passion for history and, knowledge and facts and things like that. And finding an avenue where I can, share the facts that I know with the world really just captivated my attention. And the Daily Iowan went from a photography hobby to me working desk to me being a photo editor to, as you all know, spending 40 plus hours in the newsroom. And it was over from there. I changed my major to journalism and never looked back. It became something that was extremely, important to me, something I was very passionate about.
Amazing. Thanks. Thank you three for sharing that. That's really awesome. Another question that we thought of is, what is the most frustrating thing that you see in times of crisis in terms of reporting or even photography? What's kind of a clear sign to you all that something is performative?
I'll defer to my colleagues this time to start.
I'm just kidding. But I mean, I think we all know that we live in a society that has systemic racism built into every aspect of our lives, from the industries we work in to the foundational structure of this country that was built by the hands of enslaved people. So for me, the most frustrating thing that I see in times of crisis is the devaluation or demonization of minority and or marginalized people. Instead of doing the actual groundwork and actually speaking with those people, story and the context for why something happens, or to investigate whether or not an assumed action is actually what happened. A lot of reporters and or institutions will automatically fall back on discriminatory narratives and stereotypes because they're familiar and the majority of society won't challenge those notions. I think that's changing now with what we've seen happen in the past year. So I'm hopeful for the future of journalism and what will happen, but that's just something that I've consistently seen happen. And as for talking about performativism, I think a clear sign of something that is performative, at least in my experience, is when someone plugs a lot of social justice buzzwords into their speech or their writing when conversing with someone or sharing on social media. A lot of the time then when you prompt those people for details on those buzzwords and how to actualize them in real time to create sustainable, equitable change, those people are left kind of dumbfounded and they don't really know what to say about it. I mean, for an example, I mean, those words are like intersectionality, marginalized, equitable change, subjectivity, or any like ism you want to add on to any word. So I think my advice then is before you start using those buzzwords and putting them into your reporting and on your social media, actually do the research to understand what they mean and how they're affecting the communities that you're covering. That way you can sort of create more actionable change and accountability in your life and in the lives of those around you. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like regular reporting. You have to put in the work to uncover the truth and do the research to fully understand the topic and issues that you're covering before you can inform others. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
I think Nicole hit it right on the head. She stole a lot of the things I wanted to say, actually. I think that contextualizing what's going on, particularly in the wake of things like the George Floyd protests, is imperative as a journalist. You can't simply write that buildings are on fire and stores are getting looted. The context of these people's frustration and what led to this is mandatory in the story. I think that that's also a sign to me that it's performative when you solely talk about the sensational aspects. Buildings are burning, crimes are happening. Oh my God, there are riots. When there were protests before the riots. There were people saying that we are being systematically oppressed before the riots. Protests in Iowa City have been going on about systemic racism since before I was there. I'm sure they're still going on now. So to simply cover the riots as these are riots, we perform it to me, I guess. But aside from that, I think, again, the buzzwords, don't just write, the things that sound good, actually understand what they mean. I think context. That was perfect, Nicole.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think exactly what they said is probably the most frustrating aspect of my entire journalism career. And that is just the confronting racism in every sector of our society. I, of course, went the traditional track of every newspaper journalist, from general assignment to police reporting, the education beat, housing and urban affairs, the nonprofit sector, before I finally arrived at columnist in 2016. And it was in all of these sectors, whether I was covering education in Chicago public schools, or whether I was covering housing and the tragic story of public housing in Chicago, poor people stacked on top of each other, and then people wonder, why are there problems? When white flight occurs and communities become completely disinvested of businesses, and anyone with any means moves out, and then we wonder why are there problems. So to urban affairs, inner city issues, gang problems, violence, in every and any beat and any and every sector of American society, racism is a constant. It is that thing that, as a Black woman journalist, I must confront in everything that I write, and therefore what's frustrating is having to confront it in everything that I write. And having over the years to convince my editors that when I write this from a perspective of race, it's because it is there is race involved in here. Editors and mainstream populations don't always see the race issue, don't always see how race plays into the issues that our nation confronts today. And Nicole said it so well. It is the foundation of our society. And so there is no way it cannot play into everything. And often it's very frustrating when others don't understand that. And when you become labeled obsessed with race. The good news, as Nicole said, is that in the last year, we've come to understand, hello, ta-da, we were right. We weren't obsessed with race. We just knew before you admitted it. So yeah, that's the good news. The good news is there is a reckoning with race and racism in this country, and it is much, much easier since George Floyd for me to speak my mind about those issues, for me to get those stories into the newspaper, and for me to get people to listen. And it's no longer a niche. It is the issue of the day. And for that, I'm very grateful. Oh, quickly, performative. Performative is corporate America issuing statement after statement. We denounce what happened to George Floyd. We stand for justice and equity, and these are same companies that have no minorities. No, I don't even like that word anymore. They have no people of color working for them, that have never hired and promoted people of color in any equitable fashion. These are performative and I can't even, and impotent, meaningless statements. So yeah, that's a clear sign. When you look, you peel back their history. That's a clear sign.
Love that. Amen with that. Amen. Another question is, as journalists, how can you seek out stories that uplift underrepresented perspectives rather than just reaching out in times of crisis? Because I feel like that's just a majority what a lot of journalists do.
Okay. Well, I always tell my mentees that you don't have to wait until you're sent to one of the communities considered dangerous or most plagued by gang violence, and one of the poorest communities in your town. You don't have to wait until there is crisis in one of those communities to actually set foot in them. I tell young reporters at the paper, you know, there are 77 communities in Chicago, and only about half of those ever get press. And of those half, maybe about a quarter of those are always in the news for the same issues. And again, not because it is their fault, but because of all the things we just talked about, the backstory, the disinvestment, when you leave people with no options. And so I always tell people, don't wait until you're sent to those communities. There's the list of communities right there. Take one, and once a month, once a week, whatever, at your leisure, take a drive. Go in. Go get to know those communities. See what's in them. Get to know them for yourself. See the mom and pop businesses that are struggling to survive. See the mothers with their children in the parks. See the old folks sitting on their stoops, fanning themselves. Understand this is a community like any other community, so that you don't fall into the trap of labeling them like everyone else does. So that when the police say XYZ, you've got your own perspective to draw on. So that when the powers that be, government, etc., say XYZ or do XYZ, you have something from which to measure the story you're writing. So yeah, that's it. That's what I tell people. Just seek out those stories. Go and get to know those stories before you have to because there's a crisis. And that way you start to develop sources even in those communities if you hang out long enough, and you get your own perspective.
I agree completely. In addition, I would add that, again, going back to context, I think that there's, in the post-George Floyd era as a journalist, there's nowhere for you to properly cover any beat without understanding how race relates to that subject. As Nicole said, this entire nation was built with systemic oppression in place. So you can't simply say that, this poor community or whatever. You need to understand that why these things are the way they are before you begin to report on them. That when you report, you tell the entire context of this story. These people aren't just rioting. These people have no resources. These people are over-policed. And then tell your story on top of that foundation.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, both Mono and Josh really said it excellent. I don't know what else I can really add, but just want to reiterate that I think the way you start to do that is to build connections with leaders of these other represented groups and check in on them often, not just in times of crisis, as Steve said. Spend time with these people and actually get to know them and the daily struggles they experience. Pay attention to what's happening on your local social media and dive deeper on those issues instead of scrolling past things that might have ties to large instead of affected others for bullshit. Widen your network by giving marginalized people a space where they can feel comfortable enough to share something with you as a reporter. I mean, just with these community chats, this is a great way to start that work as well. So,
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, so a lot of times that we see a lot of what, at least this is the knowledge I know too, is a lot of newsrooms are predominantly white, right? Including the Daily Iowan. How can you create an environment supportive for individuals of color? And how can we be better allies for people of color?
I'm going to defer to my younger colleagues on that.
I can go first.
Yeah.
There is no one cookie cutter answer for that. I think that each journalist of color is going to require very specific things. I think that as a young journalist, I still struggle. Actually, I won't lie to you and say I don't. I still struggle to tell my story. I think that as allies, your best bet is to get to know each person and encourage them to tell their stories. I think that as journalists of color, not just Black journalists, we have an obligation to tell our narratives in this, whatever we want to call this era. I think that now that, the cards on the table, everyone sees the same things. Let's talk about it from a refreshed light, a refreshed perspective, and encourage those journalists and uplift those and empower those journalists to tell that narrative. I think it starts there. And I think once you put them in a position where they can tell their story, it'll happen on its own.
There might be a siren that's going to blow really soon, so I'm going to try to be quick. But I think one way to do that, especially I want to further what Josh said, is also to establish accountability for staffers in your newsroom, especially around issues of diversity. In my time as a journalist thus far, I've had a lot of editors and managers ask me if the story I pitch to cover a real concern and interest in the communities that I'm a part of, which are Black and queer, have a real value at the publication because their audience is mostly white. And my answer to that is always yes, because issues that affect every member of the public should be made apparent to the public at large. I'm not covering white issues for white people. I'm not covering Black issues for only Black people. I'm covering issues that affect my community, and you guys should too. So when you see that sort of mindset popping up in the newsroom, address it. At the end of the day, establishing a newsroom where people can feel comfortable enough to talk about anything and address people in leadership will foster a stronger newsroom because you're committed to doing the work right and minimizing harm, which is a core tenet in the ethics of journalism.
I agree with both. And I will say that in this past year, when I talk about racism impacting every sector of American society, I do not exclude the industry that we are all in. Our industry is absolutely a culprit when it comes to racism and inequity and lack of diversity, and both in staffing and in leadership, decision making about what goes into the news, what we see on the television, what we see in the newspaper, what we see in the magazine, what we see on the online site. And decision making is very critical. So I say that to say, the media is not immune, and we have been just as guilty of it as every other sector of society. And with the reckoning that this country has been undergoing in the past year, the media has had to take a look at itself. Just in the last few days, the New York Times released their statement. This is the gray lady, right? That's doing some soul searching, and they were one of the first publications to be impacted by an uprising of staffers of color early on last year, after the whole protests and everything and the movement started, and it led to firings, and it has just been a wave across the nation. Los Angeles Times, a huge example, of having to just finally say, hey, here's our front page ad that says we are guilty. And so this is many more newspapers doing the same thing. We are guilty. I say all that to say that the media is finally, trying to address those issues within its newsroom. And the media is predominantly led by, white men. And so there are efforts, now to include greater equity, greater gender equity, greater race equity in staffing, in news coverage, in leadership. You're seeing newspapers and television news outlets across the country instituting a management position of diversity and equity and inclusion. There are a dozen of them that have been named in the past year. And that is a person who is solely responsible for viewing the work of the organization and the hiring of the organization through an equity lens. And that is critical. So how do you, as white journalists, create that environment? It is just through such means as this. You know, it is through those sorts of constant assessment, constant self-assessment. And in doing so, turning to those who know, turning to the experts. The experts are those communities of color, making sure that we're not just covering them or talking at them, but including them in the conversation about what is important. So those are some of the things that are happening to create that sort of supportive environment. And I will say that at the newspaper I work for, we've had those same soul-searching conversations and conferences. It led to race, what is it called? It led to sensitivity trainings, you know, that were held for the entire staff, recognizing that all of us needed to become more sensitive to the issues of race and inclusion. Be it white, Black, Latino, Asian, we all need to understand, you know, that we are a big melting pot, and the things that we can do to make each other feel more comfortable and to include each other more, and to create better allies.
For those answers. So those are pretty much what we had planned for the questions, pre-prepared. Does anyone else have any other questions? We have 15 minutes left that wants to ask. Sarah, yeah.
I have a quick question. Let's see, can everyone hear me? Okay. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations, and it's all right if you don't, like resources like a sensitivity training that we might be able to implement in our own newsroom. Just because, you know, obviously it would be wonderful if we could do some of those types of trainings too.
AP has sessions like this all the time. I don't know the exact resources that they use, but if you shoot me an email, I'd be happy to contact my HR department and ask if they could recommend anything to you guys.
That would be awesome. Yeah, I'll shoot you an email after this. Thank you.
And Sarah, the organization that we worked with is the Poynter Institute. Poynter Institute, you're probably familiar with them. They are the premier organization in dissecting journalism for some time. And so, yeah, they offer sensitivity training, and they're the ones who provided ours.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions or anything they want to say?
Yeah, I'm curious if there's any journalists you follow or different, you know, podcasts you might listen to, just things that in order to like continue the conversation about a lot of the things that we talked about today.
I'll just throw one name. Charles Blow at the New York Times is one of my go-tos for race commentary. There's so many others. Of course, Nicole Hannah-Jones at the New York Times. You would think I would be throwing out some names at the Sun-Times. I'm all in the New York Times. Oh man, yeah. So those are two names at the New York Times that I read religiously.
Yeah, I would echo Nicole Hannah-Jones. I followed her since I actually met her my sophomore year at the university. And I wrote a story about her, and she's really great. But also, she is, on her Twitter especially, she is very candid about where she stands and how she thinks things should be covered. And she's really open to discussion and engaging with her followers as well. So I would really just encourage you guys, if you don't already, to follow her. I mean, she created the Excellent 1619 Project, and she has a lot of really excellent insight because she's been doing the work for a while.
Sorry, I was making sure I follow all these people. I was going to say Nicole Jones as well. Actually, they beat me to it.
Great. We have possibly for one more question, if anyone has one.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your time and your stories with us. I mean, this was really awesome, like to be able to hear all of your guys's stories that you're proud of, and perspectives on journalism in general. So I just appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you guys for giving us the space to speak. It was true honor to be here and speak with you all. Also, I forgot another person to pay attention to. They're also and CBS, and occasionally write for a couple of magazines, but the really Leslie Lowry on Twitter has also been a good journalist that I've found. But again, thank you for the time and the space. I feel very honored to be next to these other panelists on here who've been doing the work for a little bit longer than I have.
Yeah, no, we appreciate you guys all here coming. Like, we appreciate everyone that showed up today. Another thank you for our amazing panelists. You guys were amazing. Thank you for sharing your stories to us, and taking pretty much an hour of your day just to do this. We appreciate it. If there isn't anything else, we can end this chat, but hopefully this conversations will keep continuing on, and we appreciate you guys' the resources that you gave us, and kind of the journalists to follow for sure. But yeah, so just a reminder, we have community chance plans for these next few months too. So we'll let you all know when those are available. But please enjoy your weekend, guys. We appreciate you all. It's, again, I talked about it earlier, it's gonna be 46 degrees in Iowa. And I'm guessing in Chicago too. It's gonna be a little bit warmer. So heat wave, wear your beach wear, I guess.
Oh, can I just say, follow me at Maudlin I, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
There we go. Plugging in. Let's go. But thank you again, guys. We appreciate you all, and have a nice day.